Navio Bridge. From his position next to Clara, fully geared in his armor and wearing the same shoulder cloak he had used on Matcha, Wyatt stared at the screen showcasing the beautiful green, blue, and orange-hued planet named Balakura, the capital world of House Ferentis. Unlike Matcha, Balakura seemed to be less technologically inclined, though more heavily populated if the numerous lights visible from the planet's dark side were any indication. Fully secured to his sides rested the Soul Snatcher's pistols Milcades gifted him. Commander Redford had raised an eyebrow when he saw them but said nothing as he sat on the captain's chair. They were decelerating as they approached the planet and had sent a general broadcast announcing their arrival minutes ago. After a quick exchange of pleasantries verifying the princess's identity, silence followed as Galt Tirome handled the communications. A palpable tension could be felt in the air until a throaty gasp escaped the red-harried man's throat. "My princess," Galt began, turning from his seat with a nervous look across his face to face Redford and Clara. "I've received confirmation from House Ferentis to dock with the station Honorable Vigilance. However, our long sensors have detected a contingent of 6 ships stationed with its sister station, Virtue of Insight. 6 black ships. For our sensors to have detected the black ships so easily means they are inactive," Redford concluded quickly. "Sizes? 5 Corvette-class ships and 1 destroyer-class ship. The Corvette-class ships are the same type that ambushed the Prince's fleet on Jintrax. Corvus-class ships, as far as I know," Galt answered. "However, the destroyer-class is not the same type as the Navio. It barely reaches the minimum size for a destroyer-class ship, and according to our sensors, does not have a spinal mount weapon. I believe it is a dedicated stealth ship like its smaller sister vessels." "It seems that Duke Draymor's envoys have reached House Ferentis before us," Clara said, not at all surprised by that fact. Wyatt frowned slightly. "We're going to fight them?" he asked, his mind already devising a way to take out the ships with the help of his squadron and the rest of the fighters available in the Navio. "House Ferentis has declared itself neutral. The envoys won't attack us whilst under the power bubble of House Ferentis," Clara replied calmly. "Our battlefield for now shall be discussed at the negotiation table. Galt, take us in. Dock at the designated area. Captain Milcades, I shall need 4 Royal Marines as my personal escort. I shall leave the defense of my ship in your capable hands." "It shall be done, my princess," Milcades replied, his voice impassive and stoic. "Redford, you shall remain on board. If anything adverse were to occur, you know what to do," Clara added. "As your orders dictate, my princess," Redford replied professionally. As the blonde princess placed a hand on his left shoulder, the two shared a short-lived stare before Clara, wearing her purple and blue dress, turned around. "Cynthia, Wyatt, we are to leave now. We shall head to the planet immediately. Galt, inform House Ferentis that I shall arrive in their palace and that a team of enforcers and guards are to be at the ready on the station." "It shall be done as you command, Your Majesty," Galt replied before turning back to his station, already connecting with it to carry out his orders. With nothing more to say, the trio left the Navio's command bridge and quietly made their way to the hangar. As they walked, Wyatt cleared his throat and began to speak. "This will be the second time I accompany you to a diplomatic meeting. I have studied little regarding the duties a diplomatic entourage is charged with." You are correct, Wyatt. We've been terribly busy these past weeks, haven't we? Even during our small get-togethers, we set aside as much of such boorish talks, don't we?" Clara admitted with an edge of humor in her tone that was also distant and chilly. "Your duties are quite simple, Wyatt. Protect me, of course, look strong and mean while I talk, answer only to any questions I allow you to answer, and interject on my behalf if a topic is beyond my knowledge or if my honor is insulted. Do keep in mind, however, that unlike our meeting with Uriel Holks, violence is not an option at our disposal unless House Ferentis commits taboo and ends up breaking the ancient laws of hospitality, neutrality, and proper conduct." "I assume those are bad?" asked the pilot, half cursing the many and, in his opinion, stupid rules nobles insisted on sticking to, and half puzzled as to what breaking those laws would actually entail. "Allow me to set an example that you may understand," Cynthia answered. "Imagine your family is feuding with another family for whatever reason. This reason is enough for the two families to fight, and most likely despise one another. Other families are aware of this dispute, and some support you whilst others support your rival family. However, the majority stand on the sidelines, neutral to the conflict. Now, one of these neutral has something you need, and you'd like to discuss an arrangement, let's say, a marriage proposal or a festive ceremony shared by all. Wyatt listened carefully and pictured such a scenario in his head. It wasn't uncommon for commoner families to fight over petty things, although other reasons were far more serious, like a crime committed or personal disputes that threatened the livelihood of a family member. His own family had had a short-lived feud with another family that he couldn't remember the name of because of him a year or so after his encounter with the Drazen. "This family accepted to listen to your proposal," Cynthia continued, "and thus welcomed you into their home as a guest. Isn't it a simple courtesy to treat your guests with cordiality and a measure of respect?" she asked, turning her head only slightly to glance at her pilot friend with her peripheral vision. "Now imagine that this family suddenly attacks you or insults you to the point of verbal and physical altercation for no other reason than they wish to gain favor with your rivals whilst under the pretense of amicability and hospitality. Wouldn't you agree that retaliation is more than justified against such betrayal?" How is that any different, that setting an ambush? Wyatt asked himself for a moment, but then really thought about the situation at play. If he and his family were in such a position, could they really carry out such a tactic just to gain an advantage? His family wouldn't, although he would do it without hesitation if it was done in a battle. But that isn't a battle. Would I be willing to do such a thing to someone who isn't my enemy? To accept them into my home under the lie of offering my hospitality just to stab them in the back for a potential gain? Wyatt asked himself, and while he could see the value in such a tactic, he couldn't see himself carrying it, not outside combat. The idea of doing something so inhumane, cruel, and despicable left a bad taste in his mouth. And if I am on the receiving end of such a tactic, what then? I trusted these people to stay under their roof to have a discussion, and now my family and I have been betrayed, possibly killed. If I survive such a thing, what would I do? Go on a bloody rampage? Seek revenge, throwing the advice of my father to the ground? What would be allowed to be carried out against these deceivers? Would I be justified to do anything and everything to them in retaliation? Wyatt pondered heavily, and the more he thought about it, the more he understood the position House Ferentis found itself in. On one hand, if they didn't want anything with Clara, they could have denied them docking or said something against her presence when they entered the system 2 days prior. That meant they were willing to hear her out as neutral parties. On the other hand, if they welcomed Clara to the table and as their guest, what could be the consequences of carrying out such a tactic? If they failed, there was no telling what Clara would do in retaliation. If they succeeded, then what would the prince do once he learned that his most beloved sibling perished under such circumstances? Would House Ferentis truly risk doing something like that at all? After all, they could refuse her proposal and remain neutral. In contrast, would they pass up the chance to negotiate in favorable terms with a princess of the principality? Risks and opportunities are often mistaken for one another, and wear the same dress in the face of even the most experienced, Clara said abruptly, her tone firm. Immediate risks are prominent, but those unseen and long-lasting are far more pervasive. Only a house with nothing to lose and all to gain would become such betrayal, uncaring of risks, devoid of sanity. The ill repute and the mark of distrust would be their damnation even in victory. Who could trust such loathsome creatures if they are willing to murder their guests? Wyatt let out a long, tired sigh. The more he delved into the world of nobility, knowing their plays, rules, games, and laws, written and in spirit, the more he loathed having become one. Being a commoner was much more simple. Then again, with the power and rank of nobility came many perks. Monetary perks were his greatest interest so far. Although, Clara makes a good point. It'd be stupid to break these rules without a good reason. I wonder if the Draymore envoys would be willing to try something against Clara. If they do, then I won't be lacking targets for live practice, he thought, gently patting his left handgun. Since House Ferentis won't dare to try anything idiotic, that leaves the traitors. Indeed. However, these same rules apply to them in neutral territory. Fighting in Caiston and Finnegan was expected and ongoing since they have declared their loyalties. In neutral territory, we are enemies only at the diplomacy and negotiations table. At least, of course, on paper, declared the purple-eyed woman with a mirthless chuckle escaping her throat at the end. The rest of their walk was uneventful and silent. When they arrived at the hangar, the 4 Royal Marines Clara had solicited were already waiting for her. Redford had also formed up 3 squadrons to act as the shuttle's escort, but not a single member of the composters was among the selected pilots. The heterochromatic-eyed man wondered why his teammates were set aside at first, but quickly thought about it, and putting himself in the commander's position, he too wouldn't want to reveal his best pilots for something as trivial as a simple escort mission. Less so when the enemies were likely watching his movements. Better to save your best weapons for as long as possible and strike only when necessary, the pilot thought, as he reflected on the situation. After boarding their shuttle and leaving the Noirnavio behind so it could dock in peace, Wyatt followed the path that the Ferentis navigators gave him. From his sensors represented on the tactical screen, he could see the space around the planet was busy with activity. Several dozens of ships flew peacefully, either packed full of resources going out to an unknown destination or coming to load their storage areas. There were also many gunships and other small military vessels bearing the emblem of House Ferentis, a stalk of grain growing amidst what looked to be a factory, serving as their local defense space force and peacekeeping units. As they approached and the planet became bigger and bigger, 1, then 2, and then 4 gunships came close to the shuttle, their weapons powered down, and joined the fighters as an escort, a symbol that House Ferentis welcomed the arrival of the princess. How peculiar! Wyatt glanced at Clara and stared at her smile. It was a new smile. Neither cold, pensive, playful, or calculative. He couldn't quite describe it. It was as if her smile reflected a victory in a battle that had not even happened yet. "What is?" he asked tentatively. 4 gunship escorts. Their welcoming gesture is a great assurance, Clara explained cryptically. The pilot looked past the princess, finding Cynthia's impassive expression. There would be no further explanation of what Clara was talking about. Before they could reach high orbit, their fighter escorts flew back to the Noirnavio, breaking off and letting the gunships accompany them down to the planet's surface. The shuttle rocked as it entered the atmosphere of the planet and fly across the sky freely, the roar of the engines now partially resonating across the hull completely. Having no interest in seeing the surface through the cameras or slowing down to admire the splendor Balakura had to offer, Wyatt flew the shuttle straight for the Grand Palace and seat of power of House Ferentis. Just as the Grand Palace came to view a few minutes later, the gunship escorts broke off, returning to their original duties. Moments later, Wyatt answered a ping. "Shuttle NTS-001, this is Head Navigator and Head Aero Transit Controller Udo Collio. Land on the given coordinates. House Ferentis welcomes Her Royal Majesty Princess Clara Astor with utmost respect and joy." "Copy that. Proceeding to land at the instructed coordinates," Wyatt replied, veering only slightly as he began to reduce the shuttle's speed. Within minutes, the shuttle gently landed on an ample pad located within a security complex. Outside, a dozen or so finely dressed nobles and thrice as many guards lined at each side of a long red carpet, and 2 menials waiting to unfurl the rest once it was safe to do so. The engines died, and quickly their roar was silenced. The menials quickly rolled the carpet out, ending only a meter or so from touching the landing pad's edge. The Royal Marines disembarked first, forming a quick and effective defensive perimeter around the shuttle, whilst inside, Wyatt unbuckled his security latches and moved to help Clara stand up. Cynthia, firm and ready, was already standing by the cockpit's door. Wyatt swallowed as he joined Cynthia's side, ready to open the door. "Nervous?" Clara asked softly. "I don't know if I'll ever get used to this sensation," Wyatt confessed, catching only a glance of Clara's hands shaking slightly before she adjusted her posture and her cold royal mask returned to her face. A fetching yet emotionless smile spread across her lips, similar in nature to the one she'd used on Matcha, but mastered to a deadly edge. "Good. Such feelings keep us from growing too complacent," Clara said, and then nodded once. Obeying the unspoken command, Wyatt opened the door and out came Cynthia, ready to protect her princess from any threat that could threaten the blonde woman. Clara followed, each step taken regal, powerful, measured, and heavy with the authority her name, reputation, and house carried. Finally, Wyatt followed after putting on his helmet, closing the door behind him and sealing the shuttle. He took Clara's left side, flanking and keeping a respectful distance behind her, mirroring Cynthia's movements. The Royal Marines quickly moved to further secure their position by forming behind them, much like they had done in Woodshaft. As they walked down the carpet, Wyatt focused on the faces of the gathered nobles. Most of them had smiles on their faces, but they were fake, only there to cover their nervousness and fear. The wisest among them had their hands behind their backs, hiding the slight trembling coursing through their bodies. When Clara was close enough to them, they all bowed respectfully, and a gray-haired man bearing a bushy, trimmed mustache took a step forth. I, Genoc Ferentis, head of House Ferentis, welcome you, Your Majesty, to our beautiful world of Balakura and our humble palace. You are our most esteemed guest in these uncertain times of turmoil. The man spoke with eloquence and tangible respect. A second later, a beautiful, mature, brown-haired woman and a younger man nearly identical to Genoc, but without the mustache and sharing the woman's hair color, stepped closer. May I present you my princess, my beloved wife, Ishivi Ferentis, and my oldest son and heir, Gyolti Ferentis. Your Majesty, both mother and son said at the same time with a bow of their heads. Charmed, Clara replied. I, Clara Astor, second princess of the Astorian Principality, sister to the legitimate prince, accept your earnest welcome and thank you for your cordiality and generous hospitality. I trust that your other guests will not be besmirched in favor of my presence. She asked with the same care the wind would softly caress a flower, but the air around them felt heavy the following moment, but only for a moment. As you are our esteemed guest, Your Majesty, the envoys sent by Duke Cornelius Draymore are also guests of House Ferentis. It would be dishonorable and shameful to our reputation if we were to treat them any lesser than we would treat you, my princess. That is to say, every need and desire you and your entourage may require will be fulfilled to the best of our abilities during your stay, Ishivi Ferentis said, mirroring Clara's smile. I expect nothing less from House Ferentis, Clara replied, gently tilting her head toward Ishivi, making the older woman's smile widen for a moment. Please follow me. I shall personally escort you to the waiting room, my princess. We shall begin talks as soon as our other duties allow us the time to do so. Clara said nothing as the older woman turned to act as the group's guide. For his part, Wyatt had to admit that Clara had been correct. There was no show of force, but her presence was equally commanding even without it. Thanks to Ishivi, the tension in the air was choked out. It had been subtle, but her husband, son, and the other present nobles had eased up their postures after her quick thinking. As they walked, Wyatt paid no real attention to Ishivi's words as she ranted about the history of her house, pointing out passing paintings, works of art, and other decorations that symbolized one thing or another across the long history of the ancient house. He didn't even care about the lavish and obscenely decorated hallways. He'd seen enough of it in Matcha already, and his wonderment regarding the apparent shallow displays of wealth and power nobles seemed to enjoy had died out quickly. No, his focus was set on his duty and task at hand, protecting Clara from all threats. That was the only thing that mattered. He didn't know how long their walk-tuned tour lasted, but it had been long enough for his legs to ache slightly by the time they reached the promised room. Ishivi ordered 2 servants to open the doors and the group entered. And he stepped past the door frames. Just at the edge of his peripheral vision, he saw a tall, spindly figure. He saw 2 vines tipped with claws. He saw the grotesque brown and pliable flesh. He saw a figure that he could never forget, forever burned into the depths of his mind. Wyatt's body moved on its own, shoving Clara out of the way with all his strength, not giving a damn if she fell to the ground as long as he could put himself in between her and a Drazen. His left hand quickly drew a pistol. His senses were in full gear. His heart beat hard against his ears and his muscles tensed instinctively as he bellowed a shout of pure, unfiltered hatred. But his rage was not mindless. It was focused and hot, sharp and deadly. Free from other thoughts, he fired 3 shots that landed on the bulbous section of the Drazen, where its true head and brain resided. He was about to shout for everyone to scatter when several hands grabbed him, keeping him from moving. His breathing was hard and fast, and for an instant wondered if they had fallen for a trap, his eyes never leaving the unmoving Drazan. He blinked twice, confusion replacing his hatred as he saw, indeed, a Drazan with 3 holes in its head, but it refused to fall down dead. Actually, it didn't move at all. A second later, he also noticed that there was no blood to be seen, only dust created by destroyed stone and marble. His heart slowly stopped its frantic beating, and he could hear voices again, not just the beating of his heart and white noise. "Meaning of this?" the voice of a panicked Ishivi demanded, having moved several steps away. Looking around, Wyatt noticed that the 4 Royal Marines were holding him in place. Their grip was strong, but not painful. They were only making sure he wouldn't be able to make any sudden moves. Several guards had acted quickly and rushed in, ready to fight any intruder or assassin capable of infiltrating the Ferentis Palace, but were now instead left puzzled outside the hallway, wondering what had just happened. Cynthia was next to Clara, her focus set on the princess who was, thankfully, on her feet and unharmed. But Clara was, unsurprisingly, furious. But her fury was not directed at him. Rather, her purple eyes were set upon Ishivi, who, upon receiving her fiery gaze, any outrage and anger were replaced by fear. "What is the meaning of such a statue?" Clara asked angrily, pointing at the statue Wyatt had shot. "Is this an elaborate joke? If so, I fail to find any amusement from it." "My princess, please, allow me to explain. To the statues were commissioned work by my 3rd son. He meant no harm nor ill will. It is but a decoration that your guard has destroyed," Ishivi replied, protesting against the pilot's actions. Wyatt, now calm, was let go by the other Royal Marines, looking around in confusion only to find a second Drazan statue at the other side of the door, identical to the one he had shot. Around the room, there were statues of other sapient alien life forms, including Yakanti, Jaconians, Zarmax, and others he didn't know the names of. His attention turned to Clara once more when Cynthia took a step forth and the echo resonated across the vast, ample, and lavishly decorated room. He acted out of instinct as his training demanded. "I nearly unsheathed my sword when I spotted that horrid thing," Cynthia said, pointing at the nearest Drazan statue. But he protected his princess as duty demands," Clara said, her voice now tempered and calm. "You should have warned us, Ishivi Ferentis, that we would find such unpleasant things inside this room. Sir Wyatt Staples, in particular, is adept at dealing with Drazan and the threat they possess. You should be thankful he only had the time to fire 3 shots before my men secured him." It is as you say, my princess. Please forgive me. I did not believe such a thing would spark an incident. House Ferentis would never dare to insult you, your majesty, and by extension your beloved brother, the prince. Sir Wyatt Staples, on behalf of House Ferentis, I offer a most sincere apology." Wyatt stared at the mature woman, and for a split second he saw the cowardly face of Serhan Gimor. He closed his eyes, took in a deep breath, and dropped to knee. "No, Lady Ishivi, there is no need to apologize to me. It is I who must apologize. Please, forgive my actions. I shall take any punishment you deem adequate. I overreacted, to put it mildly. I swear I almost had a heart attack," the pilot thought, refusing to look at the statue depicting the monster he hated more than anything in the universe. "If I receive a lashing for what I've done, I'll count myself as lucky. Clara and Cynthia must be disappointed in my rash and reckless actions," Wyatt thought, already accepting whatever fate had in store for him. What if his transgression ruined Clara's plans? What if it compromised their negotiations? The thought that he had failed Clara and Cynthia, that he had failed his friends, hurt more than he thought was possible. Just as he was about to beg for punishment and prostrate himself lower before a high-ranking noble lady, ready to give his life, if need be, Clara interjected. "You did nothing wrong, Sir Wyatt," she said, gently placing a hand on his right shoulder. Offering him a sincere smile, she continued, "You protected me against what you deemed a threat. This was but a sad, unfortunate accident brought by a rather distasteful choice in decorations. Nothing more." "Lady Ishivi," she said, turning to the older woman, her smile gone, "let us forget this embarrassing incident, shall we? Sir Wyatt shall pay for the damages done, and in turn, I shan't take offense. However, I insist on waiting somewhere else. I shall not share space with those abominations, even if they are mere statues." Ishivi put her hands together and bowed her head in submission. "Of course, my princess. Thank you, my princess. It shall be as Her Majesty says. House Ferentis will not overlook your display of mercy, my princess," the woman said as calmly as she could. But her voice was shaky, revealing just how relieved she was that the situation had ended so quickly and without any bloodshed. "Please follow me. There is another smaller room down the hallway. It lacks such decorative statues. I'll have my servant serve you refreshments, my princess." Clara gave a polite nod. "Let it be so." If you're already one of our Patreon supporters, you can now access the latest chapter of The Black Ship several hours before the YouTube release. If you're interested in early access, follow the link in the pinned comment below. Your subscription also supports the author who receives a share, enabling them to keep writing the story you love. Thank you for your support.